So homework. Let me read through it first, and then I'm going to explain some things to you, and then I'll demonstrate over here. So your homework is going to be to draw an interior space in 1-point perspective. Using only line. We're not trying to do any shading or anything like that. Your materials are, your graphite pencils, a yardstick, a ruler, or some sort of straight edge, eraser, and your 18 by 24 newsprint. So if you're still trying to get newsprint, you need to take a sheet with you before you leave today. All right. Now, I have some examples down here. When you open this, you can click and flip through those. But whenever I click on one, it opens kind of small on the screen here. So I'm going to go with my full-size photos here. All right, so the first thing, a few things that I want you to take into consideration when you're choosing what interior space that you're going to draw. Keep in mind that you're going to draw from observation of this space 3 times. We're going to do it in 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, and intuitive perspective. Those are things that we'll get to in the upcoming weeks. So when you're deciding on your space, it needs to be a place that you can be comfortable in. That's kind of the first thing to consider. Right? You don't want a place that you're going to be uncomfortable in, or that you're going to get lots of interruptions while you're trying to work, things like that. Also, because it is one that you're going to draw 3 times, it needs to be a space that you can return to. This isn't as much of an issue now in the time of COVID because a lot of people don't want to go and hang out at public places. But I've had in the past where students went to public places, and then when the time came for them to do the next one, the place had closed. Or there was one student I remember one year who was allowed access to the interior of this old abandoned building. And then by the time it was time for the third drawing, somebody was renovating that building and they couldn't get back in there. Most students end up doing their dorm room or like a hallway, something like that. So there's the first consideration, or I guess 2 considerations. It should be someplace that you're comfortable. It should be someplace where you can go back to. Then we're going to draw this in 1-point perspective, which again, I'll demonstrate over there in a moment. Because you know how to handle the objects in the room. Sometimes, though, how to handle, say, the walls confuses students. So we're going to talk about that briefly. When you're ready to draw from this interior space, your dorm room, a hallway, whatever, the best idea for you is going to be to work from a seated position, so you don't have to try to stand for this entire time. Sit down, and if you can get yourself nice and centered in the room, that's going to make it even easier for you. Challenge yourself, though. If you want to challenge yourself and be like, no, I actually want to sit like way over here to the left or way over to the right, that's fine. But just like what this student did, they sat right in the center so that their vanishing point could be right in the middle. Right? Then square your shoulders off with a wall. You don't want to be facing into a corner because then you're seeing your room in 2-point perspective, which is something that we'll talk about next week. You want to square your shoulders off with a wall. Then remember, 1-point perspective only works if everything in front of you is either parallel or at right angles to each other. If anything's off at a weird angle, it's not going to work in 1-point perspective. So, before you start drawing, take a look at the scene that's in front of you. And if there's anything that's out of that perspective, go move it. Turn it so that it is. If it's something that's so big that you can't turn it, or because your roommate is going to murder you if you move it, then either pretend it is in perspective or don't draw it. Right? I don't want anybody to try to confuse themselves with something that's out in front of them. Also, if there's anything out there that is either too complex or too different from all of this small stuff that we've been working with so far, all these simple objects that you don't feel comfortable yet trying to draw it, don't. Examples. Often get drawings from students where there was like a potted plant in a corner. And so all of a sudden, with all these other nicely drawn lines with the ruler, everything's going to the vanishing point, and then over in the corner, they just like scribbled something. Like, there, potted plant, right? Because they didn't feel comfortable yet drawing that. And potted plants, right? Those leaves go all over the place. They have no relationship to the vanishing point anyway. It's also okay to simplify the objects. You got a couch in front of you? Well, yeah, couches are rounded and stuff. And if you want to challenge yourself and figure out how to make rounded objects like that, fine. Otherwise, just treat like each of those cushions as if they were a perfect rectangular cube. Right? So, oh, and also, don't set yourself up for anything that you don't feel ready to do yet. Now, I want you to challenge yourself at least to a certain extent. But like this student right here kept the scene fairly simple. Right? There's not a lot of objects in here. They're facing a wall with a door, but they challenged themselves a little bit. They thought about, say, the wood that makes up the floorboards. They thought about the fact there was a door right here, so they opened it, so they had to think about what was in there. They have these shelves over here, and they had a cabinet, but they went ahead and pulled out one drawer. So they had to think about, what do I do with that one drawer? So when you're ready to draw, put your horizon in place and your vanishing point. When you're finished, erase it. You may notice you don't see a horizon line. Unless we zoom in, maybe we could see where it was. Right there. I see the vanishing point is right there. So I'm going to guess the horizon. Yeah, I can see a little bit of the horizon there. Why are you not working? All right, hang on. They did something. They have done something with the Photos app. And I can't figure out the settings to do differently. All right. Now, here's an example where a student had something in the room that was out of perspective. They had this rug that was turned a different way, and it kind of screwed up the perspective as a result. So if you've got something like that, just turn it so that it is in perspective. Right? And again, they're facing head, squared off with this wall in front of them, thinking about how all of these objects exist in that space. Now, this student went wild with it. Right? If you don't feel comfortable enough to work on this level yet, don't. Now, this is certainly A+ material, but if you're not feeling like you could do all of this stuff just yet, if you don't feel confident enough to be drawing a room, but also another room, and also another room off here, or thinking about all these shelves in here, that I get it. I mean, in this case, they even like hung something that was round so they could get one sphere in the mix. But, the perspective is very accurate throughout the whole thing. Perhaps something more like this is more your style. There are things that I can point to in here where small mistakes were made. Not so much in the perspective. Everything seems to be going to their vanishing point that they established. But they've got things like this desk feels like it's a mile deep, and each one of these shelves on the bookshelf feels like it's really super deep. And they don't feel like they would quite go all the way to the back either. But that's small stuff, right? I see them working hard. I see them thinking about and getting everything to the vanishing point. And they even challenge themselves with some interesting stuff hanging from the ceiling. And the light fixture up there let them play around with an ellipse as well. Right here, really good example where a student took their bedroom and simplified it quite a bit, so that they could draw it very easily in one-point perspective. With the exception of, say, like the rounded corners right here on the bed, they treated everything as if it was just a straight-up rectangle and didn't worry about any like soft edges that there might have been. And everything's accurate. Everything's going to their vanishing point. This student decided to draw from their bathroom. And since they were sitting on the floor, they brought their horizon down really low on the page, and that ended up making for a situation where we really do look like we're looking up at this stuff up here. Because the vanishing point's way down here, it made these lines move way up. And again, they thought about, this toilet seat, I have an ellipse. So there's something I can challenge myself with as well. All right, but even something as simple as this is working nicely, with the exception of one mistake that they made that I'll get to in a moment. Right? So I see them, there's some mistakes, like this bed looks like it's 12 miles wide, right? And things of that nature. Like some of this stuff is a little off proportional wise, but that's not too big of a whoop. Over here, they made a little bit of a mistake though, because, and this is the thing that I want you to try to avoid. Just like in the classroom, when I tell you, if you get to a certain point where something on your page is going to look different than what you actually see if you follow the rules on the page, follow the rules on the page. Don't try to guess at it and go with what you think your eyes are seeing. Because this student felt like if they followed this vanishing point, which is right here, and this would have gone upward like that wasn't going to look right to them. So they changed it and guessed at it and put these lines going downward instead of upward. And so this is now out of perspective, and it feels off as a result. So don't second guess those kinds of things. Stick with the rules on the page where whenever it feels like there's a conflict between what you're seeing and what's on the page. This student doing kitchens. Kitchens are a really good thing to play around with for this, because everything in a kitchen is kind of like at right angles. They had a little issue where you can see they drew this counter and they drew it too far into the wall. And so they sliced it off here, but then that made for some problematic things happening on the side. Again, kitchens. Kitchens work great for this. Now, I always keep these particular pictures in the mix. They're not in the ones that you'll see on Google Classroom. But this is where one student one semester decided to draw the inside of Velo. And the inside of Velo sucks if you're trying to draw it in 1 or 2 point perspective, because Velo goes off in all these weird directions. Try to avoid it. She had to do a lot of faking where this hallway doesn't go the actual direction that it should be going. And she struggled with it in 2 point perspective as well. And here, again, a student just working on their dorm. And they sat on the floor, so they brought their horizon line down. All right? Which meant they could see the underside of their dorm, the bunk bed right there. This is where I would take some notes if I were in your shoes. So drawing a room in 1 point perspective. I'm spreading my shoulders off with the wall that I'm facing, right? And that wall, because it's a distance away from me, the bottom of that wall is going to be below my eye level, but not super far below it, right? Because it is distant away from me. And the top of that wall is going to go above my eye level. Right, giving me that wall that I'm facing toward. Right, but then I've got these 2 walls on either side of me, to my left and to my right. Now, we've been dealing so far with objects that are convex, if you will. But now we're dealing with a space that is concave. So how do I deal with that? Because, right, in the way that we've been working so far, I would be lining up the ruler with a corner with that vanishing point and drawing backward toward it. But that's not going to work. Instead, I want to line up the ruler with my vanishing point and each of my corners. And then rather than taking the line backward toward the vanishing point, I want to start at the corner and move outward away from the vanishing point. Again, this is something I would take notes about if I were in your shoes, so that when you're working on this on your own time, you could have a reference to look at in your sketchbook. Right? Boom, that gives me that wall over there. I'll do the same thing on the other side, and I've got that wall. Right, away from the vanishing point. Right. Floor, wall, wall, ceiling. Right. Now on the floor, let's say I've got a hardwood flooring. Right. And in that case, I might want to just mark along this wall each of the spots where those boards touch that wall. And then I would line up my ruler with the point and with those marks that I've made and draw away from the vanishing point again. I'd keep going all the way across the floor. But let's say instead of hardwood floors, what if I've actually got tiles instead? Right? Well, now I need those. Remember, our rules is every line I put down should either be vertical, horizontal, or you should be going toward that point. So now I need some lines that cross and create tiles. They're going to need to be horizontal. But I also want to remember that as things get further away from me in space, they become smaller, right? So that if I've got tiles that are like this here, I want to make my next set of tiles a little smaller than that. And then the next set should be even smaller than that. And then even smaller, right? So that the further I go back, the smaller they become, and the more foreshortened. Make sense? These are closer to me, ergo they're bigger. With each successive one, I go smaller. If I had a rug on the floor, let's say I've got one that's kind of over this way, right? I can start with the line that makes where that rug is closest to me, then give myself two lines going back toward the vanishing point, and then cap that rug off with a horizontal line. All right, you already kind of know how to handle objects that have mass that might be out here. But let's say we have, and if it were on this wall, you'd know how to make a door, let's say. Right? Door, you just need that unforeshortened rectangle that makes the door. But if that door is on this wall, like that one is for me, right? What I usually suggest is start with the vertical line that makes up the line where that door is the furthest away from you. Then line up your ruler at the top of that line and build outward away from it. And then give yourself the vertical that you need to cap that off. There's my door on that wall. But now, I can see the width of this door, like you can, there. So how can I get that in place? Well, again, every line that I make should either be horizontal, vertical, or headed toward that vanishing point. So if I want to get the depth of this, I'm going to need a horizontal line down there and one up here at this corner. And then my vertical gives me the depth of that door now. I can also see the depth up top because it's above my eye level. So I'll line up my ruler with the vanishing point and that corner there and take it out until it hits that line there. And now I've got that depth of the door. And if the door was shut, boom, there's the shut door, right? Now, if I have an object, let me check our time, say like a cabinet or a table that's pressed up against one of my walls. When I make my unforeshortened plane that is closest to me, I want to make sure that it lines up with the wall. So in other words, bringing this line out right here, I'm making sure that one end of that line touches the wall because it's pushed up against the wall. If I were to accidentally take it out here and try to put my vertical there, that would mean either it's cutting into the wall or it's floating slightly above the floor, right? But by making sure that it touches right there at the edge of that line, I make sure that this counter then is touching the wall the way that it should be. Right? And then I can give it what it needs here. My horizontal, my vertical, like so. Now, of course, I'm not explaining this, or I haven't been doing it rather, but I'll explain, of course, erase out any lines you can't actually see. Now, same if, let's say, instead of it being against that wall, it were against this wall here. What I would want to do is start off with a line that makes up where the edge of that has that wall, and then build outward from it. So that I'm building sort of the side of the box first. And then I would give myself the front of this. That should have been horizontal, but I don't want to erase it right now and try to fix it. All right. Building it like so. This makes sure that it's up against the wall and that it's not cutting into the wall. Right? When you're finished with this whole thing, you would erase out that line and your vanishing point because you can't actually see those things. Again, I would erase out all this stuff that I can't see. All right? If anything else is just out on the floor somewhere, you already kind of know how to handle those because you've been dealing with objects that are sitting outward, right? If I had a box that was here, I know how to do that. I've been doing it in class.